In this video, I want to talk about fear and pressure. I want to help you understand that what you perceive as this unstoppable thing, this thing that you can't handle, is really an illusion. And it's probably going to piss some people off. So I want to warn you before you watch this that this is not about me reaffirming what you already believe. This is about helping you shift the way you see the world, shift the way you see your hockey game so that you can perform better. So fundamentally, pressure, expectation, fear, they're not real. They're really an illusion. They're an experience we have, but they're not the way the world actually is. And I know that at this point you're already thinking like, okay, like there's not really much point of listening to this. Like I just want to click off or I want to leave this podcast because like obviously that stuff's real. Obviously I feel this stuff and I get it. You feel it. But I want to break something down because once you understand this, it really does help you understand how to manage fear and realize it is something you're creating in your mind as opposed to not. Okay, so when I first heard fear was an illusion, I thought it was like not true. I was like, okay, I feel pressure. I feel this stuff all the time. I feel expectation. So this is, but let's imagine for a second that we had two hockey players. They're playing, let's say junior A, and they both had the dream of playing D1. Both guys want to go to, like, let's say University of Denver is their dream school. And so they have this dream and they want to go there, and that would be like the ultimate. And they have a game coming up, and player A finds out that, okay, the University of Denver, their whole coaching staff is going to be at this game to watch you, right? So they're like, okay, the pressure's on, you got to perform well, like time to. And so right away, like player A feels a ton of pressure, like doesn't want to like play bad, like starts, gets tense on the ice, just struggles, like doesn't believe in himself, is worried, makes mistakes, and then is super hard on himself, like slamming his stick, all that stuff, because it's like, man, I have this expectation, I feel this pressure, I got to perform, and they're scared, they don't want to mess up, right? And then they mess up and they're like, man, like now I'm going to lose my shot. Now, imagine player B is on the same team, but he doesn't get told about the whole coaching staff being there, right? So same general situation, but he doesn't know that, oh, these guys are here to watch you. So they're in the same exact actual real life situation, but is like super high pressure, like wants to perform, is scared if he doesn't. Player B doesn't even know, but it's the same game. The scouts are still there, the coaches are there. And let's just assume that player A like generally plays well, right? Like let's assume player A is usually a great player, and let's assume like player B, who doesn't know about the coaching staff, he like they also like good player. They both know how to mentally get prepared for games. They both know how to get dialed in, right? And if you don't know how to do that, obviously, like you can check out our stuff. We have some free training. We have a free community where you can actually start working on this stuff, Mental Mastery Academy. So you can go check that out. But if you assume both players understand what's going on, they have the skill set. But again, player A sees the pressure and expectation because he's been told something. These scouts are here. And then player B, he lives in the same world, but different context, right? He doesn't. So do you see the illusion now? What I'm saying is that pressure and expectation are created by the story you tell yourself. Pressure and expectation do not exist inherently. They exist because you perceive something that you're scared about. And for example, like if you know that something is potentially threatening you in some way, like physically or like emotionally, or something might make you look bad, like it's the perception that might happen that causes you to be scared, right? And so if you don't perceive it that way, then you're not going to be scared. And so this is where we slowly start to break down these layers and realize that the pressure, the expectation, the fear you're feeling, it's not real in the sense of it exists outside of you. It's created based on the story that you're. And do you notice how that comes out in the story, right? Like player A is creating a story and saying that I need to perform well. I know what needs to happen. Player B just goes out and plays the same game. Both are doing it in the same exact circumstance, but the story they're telling themselves is different, and the story that they tell themselves oftentimes impacts the way you perform. If you go into a game 7 of a playoff series versus, let's say, like the first game of a season, you're telling yourself a different story, but the truth is it's a hockey game. And sure, maybe there might be like, I don't know, more intensity, or players might be a bit better in those games, but fundamentally it's a hockey game. And you can perform the same way in both games, but the story you tell yourself can increase pressure, it can remove pressure. And so that's starting to think about, what is the story I tell myself? It's going to help you to understand that you're creating the expectation. So let's talk a little bit more about the kind of science slash spirituality slash a lot of things to understand just more about, okay, how does what is the real source of, like, again, like the pressure, the reason we get scared, the reason we try to protect ourselves? Well, this all comes from essentially like your ego. It comes from your sense of like I. And when I say I mean the thing that says like, these are my headphones, this is my phone, right? It's the sense. Sometimes people will call it the mind, sometimes people call it the ego, but the key is understanding it's the voice in your head. And so when you feel pressure, you feel fear, what's really happening is right? And if you never felt fear, you were never scared of what might happen, then there would be no pressure, right? Because there's no pressure if you're playing a video game and nothing matters and you're just screwing around. Like, there's no pressure. Fear essentially arises when there is a danger that we perceive in the future, and it's kind of a story we're telling ourselves, either kind of subconsciously, like if you stand on the edge of a cliff and you like look over, there's this perception of potential danger. But then there's also the story you can tell yourself about the future, like I have a game coming up in an hour or 5 hours or 5 days or whatever it is, and you tell yourself a story about like the danger of that thing, and then your brain is trying to protect yourself, so you feel fear and you get nervous in order to avoid like the potential dangers that might come to either the physical body or the dangers that. And the reason we have this protection, like the evolutionary kind of benefit of this, is that we have a fight, flight, or freeze response. And the reason we do this, at least this is the presumed evolutionary like actual adaptation for humans, when we perceive there is a threat, if there's like a bear or let's say like a lion in front of us, and we're like, okay, there is this potential thing that could kill us. Well, we have this like fear response, or this fight, flight, or freeze response, to essentially say, okay, we either need to like attack the thing, right? So like attack the animal, we need to like run away from the animal, or we need to maybe just like freeze and hope it leaves us alone. But our brain goes into this mode because over time, most likely, those are like the three most efficient ways to deal with danger, right? So we do this in order to effectively avoid getting hurt or keeping us alive. So it's a survival mechanism. But the problem is for hockey players is our brains want to do this and they want to protect us from everything. And in hockey, where yes, there's physicality, yes, there's the chance of getting hurt, but most of the fear we feel is built around the sense of self. We're scared to be embarrassed, we're scared to be judged, we're scared to look bad. And these fears then create a story, just like if we were scared of like an animal in front of us, and our brains want to go into protection mode. They want to either fight, flight, or freeze. And when you do that, you start to kind of peel the layers back of, see, that's why I'm getting so nervous. That's why I struggle to be able to get it. And so if you think about the concept of protecting the self or protecting the identity, the easiest way to think of this is think about when somebody like chirps you. They make fun of you, they judge you, and your brain automatically goes into this like protection mode. Like you want to you get mad, you want to chirp them back, you try to defend yourself, and you say like, I'm not that, I'm not this. Like someone says, oh, you're a bad skater, or you can't shoot, or whatever they say, and you automatically go into like protection mode. Like you don't do that, you can't say that. Like we all know whatever we say, it's different for everybody. But the point being is that whatever it is that you do, however you respond to the situation, it's your brain trying to protect you from this potential threat of that guy is judging my identity and trying to take away from who I say I am, and then you're trying to defend that and protect yourself. And you're protecting the identity you've built. And so this is why such a big component of what I teach players in all of our programs is that Yes, you need to build up a sense of self. You need to have a strong identity. But at the same time, you need to be able to let go of that identity and not be trying to constantly protect it. You need to be able to surrender and let go, but then you do your training and your preparation to program that identity subconsciously so that it's just who you are. So for example, if someone comes up to you and says, "Yeah, you're not a human." And you're like, "Okay, I mean, I am." Right? But then somebody comes up to you and says, "You're not a good hockey player." And you're like, "Yes, I am." Right? Because there's a need to kind of protect that because you're not deeply confident. You don't deeply believe that in yourself. And so that's the difference between something being like a surface level belief or a small belief and like a deep belief or an identity belief, right? Because when it's who you are, you don't need to really think about is that fear is not a bad thing as a whole. Like I'm not trying to say, oh, don't feel fear. You should never be scared. You should never feel any of that stuff. That's not the point. Like fear, it's different when you say, I'm feeling so scared that I can't get into a present state versus I feel Steven Kotler, who is kind of like the flow guy. He does a ton of flow research on how to get into the flow state. He talks about this idea of a little bit of flow, actually, or a little bit of fear pushes us into flow, but a lot of fear does not. A lot of fear stops us from getting into flow. And if you want to get into a flow state more consistently, the most important thing to pay attention to is, am I feeling a little bit of fear that's kind of kickstarting my system as opposed to am I getting nervous and scared? And same thing, there's a clip with John Jones where he talks about fear as well. And he talks about this idea that like, of course I'm scared. Like, of course I don't want to get punched in the face. I know that there's the danger of destroying my body when I go into these fights. He's like, everybody fights with fear in the MMA, in MMA and the UFC has it. You can't just get rid of it. But the point is I'm talking about learning how to have fear, but use it to drive your preparation. Use it to drive the work you do to get ready for the thing. But then when you go into the thing, you have to be able to let go and just surrender to whatever happens and accept that you can't change it now. When you get into a flow state, your ego fades away. The voice in your head fades away. And so that's no longer protecting you anymore. But the ego can push you to talk you into going to the gym. The ego can push you to go and do extra work. But you want to live in that kind of understanding that that is only a fuel source and it's not the actual engine, right? Like the idea of using fear to get you to go to the gym or the idea of using fear to make you push harder at the rink so that you know you're going to be ready for that big playoff game. You can use it as a motivator, but it can't be the whole machine, because if your whole career is just built around like I'm constantly anxious and scared, it's a dangerous game you play. It might work. The point is I'm not saying like there's definitely been players, there's been players for sure who have used fear and being scared to have a successful career. I'm not saying that hasn't happened, but it's a understanding of, is that actually a way I want to operate and live my life? And it's also understanding that you don't need to constantly be scared of things. You don't need to be telling yourself this story all the time of danger, danger, danger in order to do things. You can also be motivated by having a strong desire to accomplish that thing. You can actually say, I'm driven, I want to do that thing, as opposed to being scared of what if that thing doesn't happen, or what if I get hurt, or what if I fail, right? So it's understanding kind of like the cheese that's pulling you forward, and then like the danger, or like the cat that's pushing you to move forward, right? Like, or run away from. So having something that you're avoiding, so like an anti-vision, and then having a vision is helpful, because if you have something on both ends, it gives you a really good motivation to drive forward. But you have to just pay attention to how much am I focused on the thing that I don't want versus how much of the thing that I do want. And it's a constant game of, and so circling something that your mind is constructing. Fear is created in the mind, pressure is created in the mind, expectation is created in the mind. People will tell you things, but it's your perception, it's the story you tell yourself that creates the pressure, that creates the expectation. Somebody can tell you, I expect you to go score 200 goals next game. That's not pressure, because you know that's not going to happen. That expectation is not real. That is 100 is like a joke, basically. So now you're asking, how do I actually deal with pressure? How do I deal with fear? Well, the first thing is ask yourself, what is the story I'm telling myself? Because that's the actual thing you need to solve is what am I actually telling myself about the situation? And this gets at a deeper truth. Takeaway I want you to have from this entire lesson is you have to find the source of the fear if you want the fear to go away. Now, this may sound, I don't know, maybe a little counterintuitive. It may sound a little like kind of confusing. Like, okay, can I just like deal with the fear when it comes up? Like, you know, I don't know what it is. I don't know where it comes from. So I'm just going to deal with it when I feel the fear before a game, anytime it pops up. But if you want to actually stop a bleed, for example, so you have a cut and you want to stop the bleed, you got to figure out where the source of the cut is. When you find the source, then you can actually patch it up and the bleed stops. But if you try to keep wiping away the blood that's dripping down and you just keep wiping it away, well, the source of the blood, which is the cut, is still there. It's still there for you. And so you have to find the source of your fear. You have to find the source of the pressure. You have to find the source of the expectation you're putting on yourself, because it's all stuff that you're telling yourself and creating in your mind. So you have to find the source of what that is for you. It's not something that someone forces you to believe. It's not something everybody might be telling you. It could be, but fundamentally it's what is happening in your head. And when you go down into this and you dig deep into your head and you really sit with this, and this is the process I want you to go through, is take 30 minutes, put a notebook beside you, and just sit with this. Sit with, what is it that I am afraid of? What is it that I'm expecting of myself? Why do I expect this? What is the actual root of this expectation? What is the root of the pressure I feel? And the goal is not for you to come up with a story and talk yourself through it. The goal is to just sit in silence. That's why I say 30 minutes. I would do this every day for the next 7 days. Sit, close your eyes, put on some, just sit. Ask those questions, sit. And what you're going to find is that you get some answers, but it takes time. And the challenge you're going to find is that you're, number one, not going to want to do it because it takes time. But the other thing that's going to come up is you're going to feel emotions you maybe haven't felt before or as deeply. You're going to think thoughts that maybe you don't want to think. And that is what you have to do if you want to find the source. Because a lot of times we run away from the source. A lot of times we avoid the source. We don't want to admit that, man, I am pretty nervous. I am terrified of failing. I don't want to let people down. I'd be a failure. Stuff like that comes up. And whatever it is that comes up for you, that's the real source. That's the thing that's creating this pressure, this expectation, these things that you feel like you have to do, you have to perform. If you don't succeed, you're going to be a loser. It's going to be a waste of time, right? All that stuff. It's just a story in your head. It's beliefs you've developed. But are they real? I don't know. You go and do the research. Go and sit and just note things down as things come up. But don't try to solve it. Just let your subconscious mind just kind of roll over and let things just kind of rise to the surface just naturally. Right? It's almost like kind of like bubbles. They'll just kind of bubble up, and then all of a sudden you kind of see it hit the surface. Something bubbles up. Something bubbles up. And that's what happens when you just give yourself space and you sit with the thoughts, sit with the emotions, and you don't try to change anything. And so for this week, that's what I want you to do. Just take 30 minutes a day. You're not going to want to do it. You're going to hate doing it. But if you do it, let me know. Leave a comment below this video, this podcast, or the blog if you're on the blog, and let me know what you got. Because like this is where your life changes. This is where things go from something that you heard on a podcast or on a video to a actual change in your life. This is where actual change occurs, is becoming aware of the source of whatever the problem is. The source will stop the bleeding. The source of your fear will stop the fear. The source of the pressure will stop the pressure. The source of the expectation will stop the expectation from forming. And it's going to sound crazy, and it might not seem like a workable thing for you because this stuff feels so real for you right now. But when you break through, you're going to find that next level of your mental game. And so try this stuff out. And if you have questions, if you want to have like a full process to dig into this, if you need support, like coaching support, feel free to reach out to me. You You can apply. There'll be like application links or whatever all over the place.